I'm gonna lay down my burdens.
Richmond, Virginia, 1865. Burnt, desolate, wounded. What few see in these Civil War images is the phoenix that would rise from these ashes. Not the city nor its inhabitants, for they would face years of disconsolate reconstruction and frustration. The phoenix that was to come was located 8 blocks away from the capital of the Confederacy, and it would rise in less than 2 years after the South surrendered. Here, on the west bank of Shockoe Creek, in the bottom, as Richmonders would say it, was the Devil's Half Acre, a notoriously rotten pit called Lumpkin's Jail. It was a 2-story brick structure where slaves were quartered on their passage to new masters, or tortured on behalf of their present masters. Through here, hundreds of thousands of slaves saw the sun rise and set over the bottom, believing that they were in the bottom of hell. The most famous of these sad creatures was Anthony Burns, a former slave who escaped to Massachusetts only to be hunted down by the fugitive slave law and imprisoned here for 4 months in the year 1854. Here he struggled to survive until his freedom was purchased by abolitionists in the North. But this pit is not just a story of Anthony Burns. This rancid cell epitomizes the rise of a great institution, a phoenix of intellectual and spiritual pursuits. For in a bizarre twist of fate, the story of Anthony Burns becomes the story of Virginia Union University. And it began here in the Devil's Half Acre. In an 1856 account by Charles Stevens, Anthony Burns' life at Lumpkin's Jail was documented. The place of his confinement was a room only 6 or 8 feet square in the upper story of the jail, which was accessible only through a trap door. He was allowed neither bed nor air. A rude bench fastened against the wall and a single coarse blanket were the only means of repose. His chains were never removed, unless he was brought out for exhibition to the curious. Otherwise, the fetters cut off his bloodstream and caused glaring scars he had the rest of his life. The manacles prevented him from ever changing his clothes the entire 4 months he was imprisoned. A bucket of water had to last him 7 to 10 days, and his food consisted of a daily portion of cornbread with shavings of bacon or putrid meat. But survive he did. And so did the spirit of freedom he brought the Devil's Half Acre. For Burns told his fellow slaves of the freedom he had tasted, and would again. At the end of the war, Lumpkin's Jail, though finished as a slaver's tool in 1865, was about to be born again. Lumpkin provided a valuable service to plantation society, but that same society wanted no part of Lumpkin away from his jail. Consequently, he was avoided by all white female companionship. Ironically, Lumpkin freed and then married one of his own slaves prior to the war. As fate would have it, or divine intervention, when Lumpkin died in 1866, he left everything to Mrs. Lumpkin. Its future now rested with an ex-slave, and with her, the future of Virginia Union. Following the Civil War, the American Baptist Home Mission Society of New York sent more than 100 missionaries to the South to establish schools for the newly freed slaves. Dr. Nathaniel Culver came to Richmond to continue the work of Dr. J.C. Binney.
The earliest missionaries who came and were associated with the schools like Wayland and like Richmond Institute came because they'd invested heavily in the anti-slavery movement and abolition societies. And now, after all of these years of crusading for a cause that was near and dear to them and they thought was the right thing.
But just as Anthony Burns had been held captive because of the tyranny of the fugitive slave law, so was Richmond's real estate held captive by the tyranny of Southern anger. Missionary efforts from the North were as unwelcome as the federal troops quartered in the city. Richmond was much like Burns' wounds, callous and scarred by the destruction of its economy and culture.
You also had people, quite frankly, that were indifferent, and you had people who demonstrated disdain and some outrage. There are actually some examples of schools being burned in outrage. They are in the Freedmen's Bureau field records for the state.
American Baptist Home Mission Society missionaries formed approximately 20 schools for freedmen throughout the South following the Civil War. In some locations, the missionaries paid dearly for their efforts.
There were unruly mobs who burned church buildings and school buildings, who flogged the missionaries, and that there were even a few missionaries who were murdered.
Culver was unwelcome until he made the acquaintance of Mrs. Lumpkin. She leased the old jail complex to Dr. Culver. And just as Burns' suffering was temporarily alleviated by the event of his being exhibited outside to the public, so too was Lumpkin's jail given a small dose of light in an otherwise dark and blighted town. Culver began what was initially called the Richmond Theological School for Freedmen. Classes were held in the actual jail cells of Anthony Burns and his fellow slaves, classes that would free a generation of black souls in the very cells that once held them.
The president at the time preached from the scaffold from which slaves had been sold. And so it had to have been bitter that they were learning not only grammar and arithmetic, but Bible and theology and preaching and teaching skills from the very place that had been a place of enslavement.
One of the early books tells us that virtually every black pastor was a student at that Lumpkin's jail. That tells you a lot.
The United States Hotel would become the home of Richmond Theological in 1870, the result of a donation from the Freedmen's Bureau. By 1883, 20 women and 111 men were enrolled at the school. Near the end of the century, construction would begin on the Virginia Union campus that we know today. The American Baptist Home Mission Society provided $500,000 for the construction of 9 buildings. New York architect John Hopper Coxed used local gray granite and fashioned the buildings in a Romanesque style.
And the great qualities of Romanesque buildings are really just permanence and solidity, and really the overriding traits of that. And so the things to look at to recognize those buildings are large ashlar blocks, very large, rough-hewn blocks. There's nothing smooth or shiny in the buildings. It's very, very hard, solid.
The original classroom building was Pickford Hall, which was named after Board of Trustees member C.J. Pickford. Coburn Hall, named for former Maine Governor Abner Coburn, held the original chapel and library collection. Martin E. Gray Hall was named for a church deacon from Ohio who donated $25,000 toward construction of the building. It housed the original dining hall. The original dormitory was Kingsley Hall, named for Chester Kingsley, past president of the American Baptist Home Mission Society. Baptist Memorial Hall was originally the home of Dean George Rice Hovey, who later served as Virginia Union's second president. The building would become the home to 4 of the university's presidents. The first building to be used as the president's home was Porter Cottage, later demolished to make way for Ellison Hall. The power plant generated power for the entire campus. The university also had its own water supply and kept cows, horses, pigs, and chickens in a nearby barn. Industrial Hall, built by donations from the Negro Baptists of Virginia, was equipped with electric machinery for wood and ironwork, including blacksmithing.
When this goes up, this is far and away the largest construction project in the city of Richmond. And in fact, for some distance around the city. There's very little that compares.
The American Baptist Home Mission Society merged 2 of its schools to form the new Virginia Union University, Richmond Theological Seminary and Wayland Seminary. Wayland, founded in 1865, had a strong reputation for educating freedmen in Washington, D.C. Wayland's president, Dr. George Mellon Prentice King, taught at Wayland and Virginia Union for nearly 50 years. One of Dr. King's students at Wayland was Booker T. Washington.
He was a student at Wayland for less than a year, but during the time that he was there, he took courses with President King, who taught courses on public speaking. And in all of his subsequent writing, he always attributed his ability to be an effective public speaker to the classes that he taught under President King when he was at Wayland.
Dr. Malcolm McVicker, who was Superintendent of Education for the American Baptist Home Mission Society, was appointed as Virginia Union's first president. The university held its first classes in the partially completed Pickford Hall on October 4th, 1899. The first Bachelor of Arts degrees were awarded in 1902.
The significance of Virginia Union can't be overstated because you see, in having Virginia Union here, you educated the community. Many of the leaders of the community, of course, were leaders of the churches, and as such, they became the leaders of the pioneering black businesses here.
Virginia Union's legendary athletic program was started by the university's second president, Dr. George Rice Hovey. In the spring of 1907, Dr. Hovey purchased an 11-acre tract of land on the opposite side of the main campus. What we now know as Hovey Field was called Hovey Park. Professor John William Barkow was chosen to lead the Virginia Union athletic program. Dr. Barkow served the university for more than 50 years, and like the Romanesque buildings on campus, he produced students of character, solid and hard.
Dr. Barkow was the dean of the college when I was here. Very, very exacting. We would tease him of being hard but fair. As a matter of fact, he was very strict even on attendance. His own two sons were actually put out of the university because they had one more cut than they were allowed.
Up to this point, Virginia Union University was a school populated mostly by African American men. That would all change in 1932, when the school officially became co-ed and a beacon of hope for young black women with the merger of Hartshorn Memorial College. Also founded by the American Baptist Home Mission Society, Hartshorn was the first black women's college in the country to offer bachelor's degrees. Hartshorn held its first classes in Richmond's Ebenezer Baptist Church in 1883. A year later, the school received its charter and built a permanent home on the corner of Lee and Lombardy Streets.
Hartshorn was founded with the mission of producing a cadre of Christian women who would not only then have an influence in their own families, but would also influence others in the community.
Virginia Union trustee Dr. Lucille Brown's mother, Mary Laura Coleman, attended Hartshorn.
It was a very meaningful experience for her because she not only had an opportunity to take some liberal arts courses, but it was an institution at that time that had a strong Christian background.
Led by Dr. Lyman Beecher Teft, Hartshorn offered a normal preparatory course for 1 year, a normal course for 4 years, as well as college preparatory. Hartshorn Memorial College was commemorated on the VUU campus with the construction of Hartshorn Hall in 1934. Virginia Union continued to prosper and grow under its third president, Dr. John William Clark. The university initiated a 4-year Bachelor of Laws program, received state accreditation, and even started a Norfolk branch that would later become Norfolk State University. Ms. Hilda Yates Warden was a student during the Clark administration.
We were always proud about the fact that Virginia Union was an accredited college, and the students who went on for higher education programs were able to fit in and measure up.
Ms. Warden says most students walked to school or took public transportation. She fondly recalls her work-study job in the administration building.
Some people might have frowned at a job cleaning toilets, but I've laughed a lot and said, well, when you can get your tuition paid for 15 minutes of work, to me, it's like the best job I ever had.
Near the end of the Clark administration, the Virginia Union basketball program would take center stage when the Dream Team of 1938 became one of the first African American college teams to defeat a majority institution, Long Island University, by a score of 36-28.
That team went on to eventually play the Long Island University team, which was for the national championship. Then they were the champions of the nation, not in terms of classification like it is now. It was the best team in the country.
The excitement on the Virginia Union campus continued with the appointment of the university's first African-American president in 1941, Dr. John Malchus Ellison.
He proved that blacks were ready to take over. And he did a remarkable job in laying a good foundation for this university.
Dr. Alex B. James, who would become Virginia Union's seventh president, came to the university as a student in 1942.
I found a strong faculty that helped me along the way, and I just fell in love with the place.
Dr. Ellison's most visible achievement was the successful completion of the Belgian Building project following the 1939 World's Fair.
The Belgian Pavilion was one of the most architecturally distinguished pavilions at the New York World's Fair, and there were many wonderful buildings there. But this was interesting, that it was designed by Henri van de Velde, who was a Belgian architect, one of the early progenitors of the Art Nouveau.
When the fair ended, Belgian officials decided they did not want to return the pavilion to Nazi-occupied Belgium. Virginia Union competed with 26 other schools and won the building, provided the university paid for its relocation.
That building was dismantled in New York brick by brick. And Union had to take brick by brick and bring it to Richmond and reconstruct it.
It was a landmark. You could see it from all aspects of Richmond, and we identified a new Virginia Union with the Belgian Building.
In 1943, the Belgian Building became a military receiving and induction center for the United States military. Nearly 200 members of the Virginia Union family served in the armed forces during World War II. During the Ellison administration, the campus witnessed another major addition to its core studies, the Graduate School of Theology.
Dr. Ellison clearly saw the need that there needed to be a focused center for preparation for persons who were going clearly into, if we could say this, a professional ministry or a pastorate.
Dr. Ellison also had the foresight to develop the future leadership of the university.
He was the type of leader who selected strong, very strong assistants. In fact, interestingly enough, 3 of the persons he had as deans became presidents of this university.
In fact, the next 3 presidents, Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor, Dr. Thomas Henderson, and Dr. Alex B. James, all served under Dr. Ellison. At the age of 35, Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor was one of the youngest university presidents in the country when he was appointed in May of 1955.
There was a kind of a global awareness, an ethical core, and a spiritual depth that allowed him to connect the things of God with very practical living. And he had that kind of homespun wisdom, and he operated without pretension or arrogance.
Dr. Proctor and the Virginia Union Choir often made fundraising visits to local churches. The Virginia Union University Band was also established during this period, presenting its first concert on campus in January of 1957. But while the university prospered, Virginia Union faculty, staff, and students were well aware of the discriminatory racial practices taking place throughout the South.
If I went to Millen Roads and saw a hat that I liked, that I was prohibited from trying it on. I knew that if I had gone to Tallheimer's and at that time wanted to maybe have lunch in the Richmond room, that there were restrictions.
Reverend Leroy Bray Jr. was one of almost 200 Virginia Union students who staged lunch counter sit-ins at segregated Richmond department stores in 1960.
A lot of insults were hurled at us. One person had hot coffee spilled on her, and we just got called a lot of names, and a lot of things went on. And such things as the manager said stuff like this, you know you're wrong, you know you don't have any business sitting at this counter.
34 of the students were arrested and became known as the Richmond 34.
I got scared when they told me I was under arrest, and then my mind began to work and wonder how I was going to get out of jail, because I had not apprised my parents of what I was going to do.
Reverend Bray and the others were quickly bailed out of jail thanks to the generosity of many, including then Vice President Dr. Alex B. James and his wife.
We made a deal with the magistrate downtown that if any of Union students get arrested, our home will serve as bail for them, because we don't want them to serve time in jail for a cause that was right.
The fourth and final institution to merge with Virginia Union was Storer College. The merger took place in 1964 during the administration of Dr. Thomas Henderson. Storer College, founded in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia in 1867, was the first college for blacks in West Virginia. It was founded by the Free Will Baptists, who later merged with the American Baptist Home Mission Society. In 1954, when the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision outlawed legal segregation in public schools, federal and state funding for Storer was discontinued. A year later, the college closed its doors, and the history of Storer College was forever folded into the history of Virginia Union. Tragedy struck the Virginia Union campus in 1970, when the university's beloved Coburn Hall was gutted by fire. Chapel attendance in Coburn was required several days a week, and students looked forward to accomplished speakers such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
We heard Benjamin Mays, who later became the president of Morehouse. We heard Mordecai Johnson, who was president of Howard University.
We had several chapel drives, and the churches of the state really chipped in and helped to raise funds for rebuilding of Coburn.
Another kind of fire was burning at Virginia Union when the decade of the 70s began. Virginia Union graduates were at the forefront of change taking place in the local political arena during the James administration. In 1972, VUU Dean Miles Jones became the first black to chair the Richmond City School Board. In 1977, VUU alumnus Henry L. Marsh III became Richmond's first African-American mayor, and the university's most well-known elected official, Lawrence Douglas Wilder, became the country's first elected African-American governor in 1990. The university's athletic program would once again take center stage during the administration of Dr. David Shannon. In 1980, the Virginia Union men's basketball team won the NCAA Division II National Championship. The 1985 team almost clinched another title, setting a record of 30 consecutive wins during the regular season. But the early 80s also brought sadness with the passing of Coach Thomas "Tricky Tom" Harris.
Coach was a football coach, the basketball coach, the track coach, tennis, golf.
Coach Harris hired Dave Robbins as head coach of men's basketball in 1978. It created quite a stir.
I didn't realize that I was not only the first white coach in the CIAA, but the first white coach at any predominantly black university.
Discussion about Coach Robbins soon turned to his phenomenal record. When he retired after 30 seasons at the university, he left behind a legacy of 3 Division II national championships, 713 career victories, and 13 CIAA championships.
It's intangibles. You know, the kids I recruited or the young men I recruited, I recruited some players that nobody else wanted, and I recruited some that everybody else wanted. But it's just something about, you know, never say die, play till the end of the game. You know, it's not over till it's over.
Tenacity and commitment to excellence have continued throughout the more recent history of Virginia Union under the leadership of Dr. S. Dallas Simmons, Dr. Bernard Franklin, Dr. Belinda Anderson, and Dr. Claude Perkins.
Even today, though, our mission hasn't changed. Of course, we have technology and we have all different kind of degrees, but we're still an institution that are trying to provide an opportunity for students who may be the first generation of going on to college. We're still an institution that provide access and opportunities for students who may be in need of some additional motivation to get social justice to deal with a college experience.
The Virginia Union College experience today includes 24 majors located in the Sidney Lewis School of Business, the SciFac School of Education, Interdisciplinary Studies and Psychology, the School of Mathematics, Science and Technology, and the School of Humanities and Social Sciences. The Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology remains the university's only graduate school and offers a total of 5 degrees.
We have people who fly in every weekend from Florida, Detroit, you know, Pittsburgh to do what? They want to study at Virginia Union.
Our legacy is in the graduates of the institution because those are the persons who continue to model those values and behaviors that we are trying to extol for our students.
Virginia Union graduates are currently making their alma mater proud throughout the world. The university counts among its alumni 22 college presidents, as well as leaders in the fields of medicine, law, business, education, and theology, to name a few. The one thing that they all have in common, a fierce respect and admiration for their heritage.
It's actually been both inspiration as well as motivation for me to always strive for my best. I believe that if it had not been for my forefathers and my foremothers going through what they went through at the time in which they did, that I would not have the opportunity to be here.
We're not just training you to be just another college graduate, but a college graduate that will make a real contribution to society.
Graduates like Eva Roberta Coles Boone, Hartshorn class of 1899, who lost her life and the life of her child, serving the children of Africa as a missionary running a kindergarten for Native children. Or Eugene Kinkle Jones, VUU class of 1906, founder of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity and member of President Franklin Roosevelt's unofficial Black Cabinet.
Call a church and call a name, and then when you call that name, you're going to say Virginia Union.
I think Virginia Union is reflected in history as a beacon of light for higher education.
Today, no physical remains can be found of Lumpkin's jail. It is buried under 10 feet of dirt and concrete that support Interstate 95 as it passes through Richmond. But less than 5 miles away, the bridge to intellectual freedom and equality continues to be built. The difficult birth that was Virginia Union, the first of the American Baptist Home Mission Society schools, has grown to fulfill its promise. It is the promise of a limitless future. The story of Virginia Union University is no fiction. It is a story of redemption, a story of a place once known as the Devil's Half Acre, now known as God's Half Acre. May it ever be so.